All right, let's move forward with our two witness subject. And I was saying earlier, if anybody wasn't here, the two witnesses is a very difficult subject to explain the first time and go through it, because we have these two timelines that we've been looking at, 42 months and 1260 days. And sometimes it's very easy to confuse one with the other, because sometimes it sounds like it's the same thing, but it's actually a different movement and a different focus. And I had to get my head back into it this week and really read on it, and I'll do the best I can with explaining as we go. But just real quickly to get us up to speed, I'm going to fly through these first 5 or 6 slides real quick, where it started with the two witnesses, and as you can see from the picture, the two people in sackcloth prophesying to this temple, and the two olive trees and that are feeding the candles. And we talked about the lampstands. We were reminded of what a lampstand is, the light. It can't work without the oil, things like that. But we talked about how these are two independent forms of witnessing. And it's just not two old men walking around in sackcloth as the world thinks is going to happen, and a lot of Christianity is thinking it's going to happen, and Hollywood is portrayed as happening. It's two independent forms of witnessing, and this goes on for 1,260 years. So it's a very long, drawn out process. It's not something that happens quickly like a short period of a war. And we looked at similar symbolism. I won't read all the way through it, but how Zechariah saw a similar thing of two olive branches feeding, going through pipes and feeding a lamp. And it explained it that he said, these are two anointed ones that stand by the Lord of the whole earth. So this is, again, symbology that would already be familiar to a Bible student when he reaches the Revelation. And so we can look back and see what it's directing us towards in our thinking. And the olive branches we talked about, which was very important in this, is that it can represent Gentiles. And we looked about how the Gentiles were grafted in as a wild olive tree into the hope of Israel. And also, people might think, or is it just Jews, or is it just talking about Christmas? It's speaking about Gentile people can be used, even though they may not be those that will be resurrected at the resurrection. And that they were prophesying to the God of the earth, not the God of heaven. And in Thessalonians, as it said, who opposed and exalted himself above all that's called God, that is worshipped, so that he is God, sits in the temple of God, that he is God. And we looked at how that obviously steers us directly towards the papacy. And we looked at the Pope that actually used the words as saying that we are as God upon earth. These are, again, the amazing things that have been recorded in history where the world might totally miss it, but we should red flag it as something to look closely at. Again, guideposts through time is what these are. And we look at that the two movements were political, which is the military opposition, and religious, which was the Protestant faith. And we talked about that there are many Protestant faiths, which, and the word Protestant, of course, means to protest. And that's exactly what some of these people were doing. They were protesting against the papacy for all its liberties and things that they were taking, and the things and the power that they had. So the word fits perfectly for them. Again, I'm trying to get to the point where we left off, and this is, of course, is how Hollywood displays it, but it makes a great slide for a PowerPoint. Why are they not of the household of God? Because, as we've seen in Scripture, many people were called, like the king of Babylon was called my servant. He was serving a purpose. He wasn't aware that he was serving a purpose, but he was serving a purpose for God, and when he was done with them, he was removed and gone. The whole nation was gone. And also the Medes and the Persians were referred to as his sanctified ones, my mighty ones. Why? Because he was using them as a tool. But doesn't mean that they were a chosen race of people to bear God's name. So we can see how this doesn't, these two witnesses don't necessarily apply to the brethren, although they can be mixed into it as we go looking at it in a very mild way. Again, they were called the sanctified ones, and we looked at that. We don't need to look at that again. But anyway, this is about where we left off. Now, what I'm going to start doing is, as a request from the audience, I'm going to let more of the Bible verses be read, and I will handle the commentary. That way we can all be a part of it. So I'm going to start over here. Linda, you're first up on my list. Can you read this verse? We're Revelation verse 5 now. We've only gotten through 4 verses up to this point.
Revelation 11:5. And if any man will hurt them, 2 witnesses, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. I can't see part of the screen.
And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed.
Okay, so here we have a verse that's telling us if any man will hurt them, that fire is going to proceed out of their mouth. Now, of course, as we can see how Hollywood displayed it, that these 2 men would blow out fire, and if you watch the movie, it sort of incinerated the soldiers that were standing in front of them. But that's not what's going to happen. In fact, it's already all happened. So, but we need to look at the words that we've already come to understand. But it obviously tells us there's going to be a conflict. It's not just going to be a war of words. There's going to be an actual physical conflict that will probably take place, and it did. And that these witnesses will have defensive powers, so to speak. So what does this mean when we see a verse like this, that fire will proceed out of their mouth? Well, we've seen that fire is a symbol of war. We remember the Saracen fire, when gunpowder was being developed, and then finally, we saw the cannon fire where it says they ushered out brimstone and fire and things of that nature. So this should kind of lead us toward, okay, this is going to be some kind of this is referring to a military conflict of some sort. And what we're going to, the political and religious world took up arms against the papal system in many ways, coming up through these, what I would call the Dark Ages, if I'm right. We're going to kind of look at like the end of those Dark Ages here tonight. And groups like the Walneys and Huguenots were a big part of this. It's interesting, we have Huguenot Road over here in South Richmond, and I just went by a plaque yesterday, no, it was today, about the Huguenots establishing themselves in a place right there, over there near right over there near Salisbury, where Bob Tucker lives. There was a place over there where the Huguenots had a place.
And they were fighting French religious oppression, correct?
Yes, we're going to see that tonight, actually, with something that you steered me towards back when I gave the class to you. We'll get into that.
Okay.
Now, the sackcloth implies that they are persecuted or downtrodden, not that they're poor or can't dress themselves well. But anytime we see someone in sackcloth, we think about the underdog, things of that nature. Now, I do the best to try to explain these guys because it's extremely complex in some ways, and it covers so much history, but we can only look at some of the focal points and the highlights of that history of where they took place. Okay, moving on. Let's see, David, you're next on my screen. Would you read this verse here?
These have power to shut heaven, that is, rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will.
Okay, so we can see that they have power to make things happen. And again, keeping in mind, it's not necessarily literal things, although some of these things I'm going to show you lean towards a literal aspect of it. But what this is telling us is that this is going to be a rough time, because they're going to use this power and this fire as best they can. But what we'll find out in the end, they get knocked down. But we'll see. I don't want to give it away if you're not already familiar with it. So shut heaven. What does it mean they shut heaven? Well, we know that God's heaven can't be shut. It's never closed for business or anything like that. But we've seen something similar to this. And I would suggest to you, and I'm getting this from other writers who worked on this before me, that peace would be withdrawn from the false Christian heaven. And remember in Revelations 8:1, when we go back, when Constantine came into power and when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven. Well, we talked about that. That was when there was this 14 to 15 year segment of silence and peace, because Rome had been at such war. Because when Constantine rose up, there were 3 emperors. He overthrew 2 of them and brought peace to the empire during his lifetime for at least 15 years. But we know that God's heaven wasn't silence in heaven, but there was silence in the political heavens. So when it says they open and shut heaven, this has to do with the things here on earth, not in so much the things in God's dwelling place. Okay.
Roger,
Yes.
wouldn't it also include the cutting off of God's blessings at certain times?
I think it could, yeah, because it spoke about, if we went back 2 slides there, the rain not and things of that nature. Now, to what extent that happened, I don't know. Do you know something? Do you have something in your mind?
No, I just, in general, I feel like that's part of what it deals with. When we look at a phrase saying shut heaven, it shuts the action of our Heavenly Father, I think, all times.
Okay. I hadn't heard that viewpoint, but that's interesting that this was the viewpoint that I found in the most books I read. But it could be that there are a lot of things that happened that you would have understood in certain centuries that maybe we don't quite know what happened or history didn't record it. Because some of the things I show you, history records, but most people don't even know anything about that they ever took place. So, but if you know of something in particular, I would love to hear it. So,
well, the vast majority of time you see the phrase shut heaven. Throughout the Old Testament, God is referring to the fact that he closes the heaven against allowing rain to come forth
Right.
upon the land.
Right.
I mean, that's when heaven is closed, when God himself says, I shut it against bringing the rain upon you. So
So you're saying that the heaven being shut equals no peace. Is that correct?
no.
That's
what
what I
I'm
saw you.
saying, okay, I'm not sure. See, this is hard to explain.
No, I want to make sure I get it right.
Well, I would,
It says peace withdrawn.
yeah,
from-
peace withdrawn from the political and spiritual heavens. There was a peace that was gone. And what actually the story plays out, it might make more sense rather than trying to explain it on the front end. But Walt is right. When we read about heaven being shut, it had to do with what physically fell on the earth. It didn't have to do with God's dwelling place. I guess that's what I'm trying to get across there.
But peace is the thing that's being removed. That's the heaven being shut.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I believe I think it's referring to the political heavens and things of that nature, or the religious heavens that were going on at that time. I think. Now, I am open to understand, but that's the way I've understood it from the writers that went before me. And there are different opinions on this. But let's let the story play out, and let's see what And you'll come away with your own viewpoint, possibly. Also, it said powers over the waters. Well, we've seen this, the waters get talked about quite a bit in Revelation. And we've talked about how that can represent the masses of humanity involved. And they would turn to blood. When you remember, there was much bloodshed during the Babylon, excuse me, I went too quickly. There was much bloodshedding. It said that through those the seal periods, the rivers turned to blood. It said another one of the barbarian attacks when I think the Vandals came across the Mediterranean Sea, that the sea turned to blood and things of that nature. Of course, it was just that so many men died in the sea that it's representative of a bloody battle. So these phrases that we're seeing here may allude to that same situation that is now going to take place in this during this period of time with these more established countries. We're going to see that France is one of the big ones that comes into the picture, and all. In fact, a lot of this starts in France and all. So the witness period is thought to, the best I've heard and read, seems to have started at the time of Constantine. There were those back then, as we saw previously, that were in conflict with the rise of this new Christianity that was still in the vacuum. Just like we're seeing in Afghanistan, there's a vacuum that gets filled for who's in power. Now, even in the short period of time, we see the Taliban and ISIS fighting for power in the same vacuum, right around the same airport. So these vacuums get filled when something really big changes, and Christianity was filling that vacuum as paganism was going down, to the decline of paganism. And the strongest references seem to reference when Constantine came to power, and 1260 years later was in 1572, the massacre of St. Bartholomew. Now, I knew nothing about this until I actually, Joe and I went over the class together, and he brought this to my attention of this time.
And what's the beginning date?
312. Who's next here? Nancy, would you read this verse?
Revelation 11:7. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them.
Okay, so here we see there's this beast is going to come out of a bottomless pit. And we talked about the bottomless pit already. This should not be foreign to us. And the times where we've seen it in the past, it represented a place where a host came up, and they were military movements that overran things at the time. Remember the locusts that came up that represented out of the bottomless pit, that represented Muslim invasions in the East and all. So this is not an unfamiliar phrase to us. Now, this picture I got here was extremely unique to me, and I know it's really kind of horrible, but it's what happened. And we're talking about the two witnesses here that says they will kill them. So the witnesses at some point in time are going to be killed. We're going to look at that tonight. Now I have several slides here to show you about the recorded history of this time, and Joe knows more about this one than I do, but I'll give you what little bit I have. This is Catherine de Medici. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
De Medici. She was Charles IX's mother. Charles IX's mother was thought to be the instigator of the massacre, but historians debate that she wasn't involved. But she was an extremely powerful woman, and her sons became kings in France. But what this is telling us, that this beast system, at least for a while, has the victory. And we're going to see that even into their money. Now, before we look into the history a little bit of this woman and what all she set forth, and if if you look at the pictures, this is exactly what she looked like. It was an extremely well done painting of them walking out after this massacre. And we're going to look at who did she have massacred, is what's interesting about it. Now, real quickly, to jump forward, I'm just going to jump forward to try and explain to you what's happening in history. This is a picture of the dragon and the beast of the sea, which we'll get to in a couple of chapters. And I'll put this verse up here. Let's see, Patsy, are you there? I don't see your pretty face. Perhaps not.
I'm here.
Here she
I'm
comes.
here.
Okay.
I have my iPad's messed up anyway. I'm here.
All right. Could you read this, please?
Revelations 13:1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy.
Okay. Like I say, we're jumping ahead, but what I'm going to show you is this beast that's coming up out of the sea is this time that we're referring to, which has already been going on for hundreds of years, but it got to one of its high points in this story.
And guess what? We're at the anniversary of that. It happened August 24th to August 25th. Today's the
It's
26th.
Oh, how convenient. Maybe the Lord's in that somewhere. I don't know. That's interesting. How many years ago was that? 1260?
Yeah,
No,
as long
it
as
was,
1572.
It'd be about 700 or 600 years ago.
Yeah.
Almost quite a while back. That's interesting. All right, so let me explain this if you're not familiar with it. Some of you already seen it before, but look at these creatures closely. And it's very interesting that I believe the Christadelphian did this picture, which was amazing to see. It says the pagan dragon or Roman influence in this picture is given its power to the beast of the sea, which is rising out of the sea. I'll run it back so you can see. See, it's just walked up on the shore. This beast, which represents the papacy, is the beast that will morph through history. It's morphing, and all the heads represent different periods of time. Just like on the dragon, it's just not some crazy creature, but every head has a meaning. And if you look at the crowns on the dragon, they are on the heads of each dragon head. But if you look at the crowns on the beast, the crowns are on the horns. So this is the influence where, as paganism went out and the religion and the apostasy filled the vacuum, starting at Constantine, nations started rising up that took part in this thing, like France, Austria, and some of the other ones. But as you can see, the crowns moved to the horns. And as you remember talking about, horns represent authority. So these horns have authority, but as the verse says, the heads, the name of blasphemy. Now, blasphemy tells us it is a religious power, because we use the word blasphemy in regard to false teaching and false speaking and speaking against the truth. But if you're following that. So this massacre, I would suggest to you, is one of the attributes of the sea beast as it rises to power. It will not be destroyed for centuries yet, but it will be destroyed eventually. And I realize, again, that this is difficult to take in. It took me a while to sort it all out from the writers and then put it into pictures. But hopefully you'll see patterns and monumental moments that I'm going to try to show you over the next several weeks, and trying to tell us that we're looking in the right place. So let's come back to where we were. Now, this is the history of this. And Joe, I guess I'll let you, since you kind of steered me in this direction, I'm gonna let you have the honors of reading this.
Okay, because I've got some here too. But
Okay.
whatever you want.
Well, this might cover it.
The massacre began on the 23rd of August, 1572, on the eve of the festival of Bartholomew the Apostle, 2 days after the attempted assassination of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny the military and political leader of the Huguenots, the king ordered the killing of a group of Huguenot leaders, including Coligny, and the slaughter spread throughout Paris.
Okay,
Is that the whole thing you got?
no, I've got a couple more slides, but I want to cover these because I don't want to have to back up. Notice what it says, there was an attempted assassination
That
of this
failed.
admiral that failed, but look, the military political leader of the Huguenots. There we see both of them working together. The military, the political leader of the Huguenots, which was a religious body. That's a denomination. So we see that right here, and that this is Wikipedia here. This is recorded this way in history. And again, that's why I think
But
it's
The admiral, the assassination was to try to kill the Huguenot leader,
right,
but he wasn't Catholic. The Catholics were all against him.
right.
Yeah, I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, I don't think I covered that, but the story, there's a whole lot you could read on it. So let's
We continue,
wait a minute.
because I've got some here too. if you want.
Yeah, here we have recorded that Catholicism attempted to assassinate one of their leaders. But we also see the two witnesses movements had taken up the sword. Also, here's where we also see France growing into a power from the barbarian period France had risen from. So go on, here's more of the details. Joe, you keep reading the story.
Lasting several weeks, the massacre expanded outward to other urban centers and to the countryside. Modern estimates for the number of the dead vary widely from 5,000 to 30,000. What I just read was 70,000.
Yeah, there's
It's
still,
just huge.
yeah,
Because the difference is the smaller number is how many died in Paris, and the second number is basically who died everywhere else.
yeah, outwards, because it says it went out, it went outside into the countryside. All right, so here we see that they tried to destroy a religious sect that had gained power and strength, as we have been told they would have. The witnesses would be that way. But this was a development over 1,260 years. This isn't something where the Huguenots suddenly got powerful and all. This is something that has been developing for a long time. All right, Joe, I think no, I got a couple more.
Okay. The massacre also marked a turning point for the French Wars of Religion. The Huguenot political movement was crippled by the loss of many of its prominent aristocratic leaders, as well as many reconversions of the rank and file, and those who remained were increasingly radicalized.
Right, so we see that they were, the witness movement was greatly injured in this moment. And many people went back to being a Catholic rather than risk being slaughtered. It was like, which we heard all through the Inquisitions, where you recant what you believe and where you won't put you to the stake. So, and moving on, Joe, here's one more.
Though by no means unique, it was the worst in the centuries religious massacre throughout Europe. It printed on Protestant minds the indelible conviction that Catholicism was a bloody and treacherous religion.
This is what history records. And France has been referred to as the eldest son of the church. And so that area had become extremely under Catholicism. In fact, the first pope, the first king who was crowned by a pope was Charlemagne, and that happened in present day France. And that was 800, Christmas Day, 800 AD. Mark, you've got something else?
Yeah.
to add to it?
Shortly before the dawn on August 24th, the bells of Saint Germain began to toll and the massacre began. The first of the victims was Coligny, who was killed under the supervision of Henry de Guise himself. Even from within the Louvre, Navarre's attendants were slaughtered through Navarre, and Henry I de Bourbon and the second Prince of Condé were spared. The homes and shops of the Huguenots were pillaged and their occupants brutally murdered. Many bodies were thrown into the Seine River. Bloodshed continued in Paris even after the royal order of August to stop the killing, and it spread to the provinces. Huguenots in Rouen, Lyon, Bourges, Orleans, and Bordeaux were among the victims. Estimates from the numbers that perished in the disturbances, which lasted from the beginning of October, have varied between 2,000 by the Roman Catholic apologists to 70,000 by the contemporary Huguenot Maximilien de la Sully, who himself barely escaped death. Modern writers have put the number at 3,000 in Paris alone. Here's the big part at the end. The news of the massacre was welcomed by Philip II of Spain and Pope Gregory VIII, who had a medal struck to celebrate the event.
We're going to see that.
Protestant nations were horrified. To explain the massacre, Charles assumed responsibility for it, claiming there had been a Huguenot plot against the crown, which is also a lie. Instead of crippling the Huguenot party as Catherine had hoped it would do, the massacre revived hatred between the Roman Catholics and the Huguenots and helped provoke the renewal of hostilities. Henceforth, the Huguenots abandoned John Calvin's principle of obedience to civil magistrates, that is, to the royal authority, and adopted the view that rebellion of tyrannical rule were justified under certain circumstances.
Is that all Wikipedia?
No, it's a specific site to this.
Oh, okay. Anyway.
I just think it's really interesting because they struck a medal to celebrate.
Yeah, I've got those pictures tonight, actually. We'll get to them here in a little bit. It's amazing to see. And scripture seems to refer to those medals. I'm going to show you that. H.P. Mansfield in the book of Revelation said this: the full weight of Catholic power was directed to stamping out Protestants. And because the testimony of the two witnesses was at an end, because we know they're being killed here, and there is confidence was placed in the arm of flesh rather than that of God, the opposition was successful in its attacks. All right, so here we have Revelation, but this line that we read earlier, Revelations 11:7, and shall overcome them and kill them. For a short period of time, this is interesting, the Edict of Nantes brought some religious freedoms. Now, this is interesting just that these documents existed. This was like they got a little breathing room. This is the Edict of Nantes, and this came about 25 years later after this, where probably most of the people are dead. And Catherine, whatever her name was, is probably passed. It has passed by now. It was signed April 1598 by King Henry IV of France, granted the Calvinist Protestants of France, also known as the Huguenots. So Calvinists and Huguenots are the same thing. Substantial rights in the nation, which was at the time still considered essentially Catholic. So this edict gave a little bit of breathing room, but it was still 25 years have passed since that horrible scene we just saw.
Well, you just read at the end of this, they said they rejected Calvin because Calvin said you have to obey the local authorities. And they were like, from now on, we're going to kill the tyrant. So Huguenots wouldn't put up with it anymore. So that's probably why they wrote this edict, was to try to appease them.
It may have been. In the edict, Henry aimed primarily to promote civil unity. The edict separated civil from religious unity, treated some Protestants for the first time as more than mere schismatics and heretics. So this guy, he had a little more open heart towards this terrible thing that was going on, but that didn't last but very long. Well, actually, it lasted a little. That was 25 years later, the Edict of Nantes came on. But then 85 years later, things turned very bad again. And Louis, what is that?
It's Louis.
Louis the
the
14th.
14th. Okay.
He's the most famous of all of them because that's when it rose to the height of the zenith of opulence, of wealth, of
Yeah.
just over the topness. And so his wife, I think, was the one who was Marie Antoinette.
Okay. All right. I didn't know that. This is just what I pulled out from this. In October 1685, and you see how much we've moved up through time, 85 years, Louis, the grandson of Henry IV, grandson, so you can see there was a man in between, but he's a grandson. The edict was declared Protestantism illegal with the Edict of Fontainebleau. Did I say that right?
It's Fontainebleau.
Fontainebleau.
Yeah.
This act commonly called the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. In other words, it was written to do away with that. Had very damaging results for France. And this is amazing when you look at this. All Protestant ministers were given 2 weeks to leave the country unless they converted to Catholicism, and all other Protestants were prohibited from leaving the country. Now, doesn't this sound like Afghanistan today? I mean, get some people out, but the others can't leave. It's the same type of almost terrorism that's going on. No, you can't leave. You become prisoners in your own country. In spite of the prohibition, the persecuting, including many examples of torture, caused as many as 400,000 to flee France at risk of their lives. And this is something, we see these creatures that we're going to look at, the sea beasts and all these, the dragon with all the heads. This is why the rise of papacy is represented as a ferocious beast coming out. It didn't come out as a little pussycat. It came up out as a leopard with teeth and everything. And when we see the dragon and the woman sitting on the beast, when we get to Revelation 17 and all the heads and everything, it's a ferocious thing. And this is the light that God puts man in.
I was going to say the Spanish Inquisition, which became before that, which is at the end of the 1400s and into the 1500s, was a mirror of this on an even grander scale, because they told the Jews in Spain, convert to Catholicism, or we're going to seize your property and you're going to be forced to leave. As a matter of fact, many people thought that Columbus himself might have been Jewish, and then he left just to get out of the country because of how bad the situation was, because he feigned that he was Italian. But that's something Louis might have learned from his, is that by expelling so many people from the country, the wealth went with them. And so he didn't want that to happen. He wanted them to stay in the country so he could seize their wealth.
I'm sure it was a good reason for his selfish reasons, not just to keep people captive.
But again, it was a huge Catholic effort, and there was all kinds of people tortured, imprisoned, or executed.
Right. This is supposed to be God's church. At this point in time, what we just looked at, from what I found, it appears the witnesses are dead, where it said that they would kill them. And here's the next verse that comes. Let's see who's next up there. Martha Childs, are you with us? I see your name.
Hello.
Hello.
Revelation 11:8. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified.
Okay. Now this is an interesting verse to explain, because we know that the Lord was not crucified in either Sodom or Egypt, was he? So there must be attributes of these cities that reflect the conditions when the Lord was crucified in Jerusalem.
Well, several times in Scripture, Jerusalem is referred to as Sodom because of the things they did sin-wise. So there are several verses that you could use to link that up.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about Egypt.
I'm not sure about Egypt either, but this great city, we can see that the great city is spiritually called. So we see, obviously, it's signifying something. It's not that he was crucified in; it's spiritually called. So it's referring to the spiritual condition of those cities in reference to where Christ was crucified, which is a very bad time. And we know 70 years later, Jerusalem was destroyed. So let's look at this phrase, the great city. We read in Revelation 16:19. Oh, Leah's here. My love, would you read this one?
Sure. The great city. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath.
Now, you notice I've jumped to Revelation 16:19 because it speaks of this great city. And it's a reference to Great Babylon, which we know also is where a lot of this paganism and everything came from, and a lot of the wickedness that came and ends up being this harlot sitting on the back of this beast called Babylon the Great. So this is the spiritual condition that is going on at this time.
Real quick, if I could interject, to support what you're saying, in Isaiah chapter 1, verses 9 and 10, it says, if the Lord of hosts had left us no few survivors, we would have been like Sodom, we would have resembled Gomorrah. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Listen to the instructions of our God, you people of Gomorrah. And it's referring to Israel in that text. Then in 13:19 of Isaiah, it says, and Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the glory and the pride of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. And then Lamentations refers to Israel again in the context of being Sodom. The punishment of my dear people is greater than that of Sodom, which was overthrown in an instant without a hand laid on it. So, and Ezekiel has it in chapter 16, all over the place. So I just didn't know.
No, I don't have any more on it. I'm just to show that it's referring to the condition of Babylon, how we understand that, how the church is referred to Babylon in when we get to chapter 17, and how her cup is filled with the blood of the saints, things of that nature. So it's referring to the spiritual condition of that time, which is as bad as Babylon, Sodom, Egypt, and all those things. And Babylon at this time has been gone for, where are we now, by France time, 2,000 years or more. Because Babylon disappeared around 550 or something like that, or BC. I don't know for sure. Well, we can see about 2,000 years have passed. Also, here we go. I had it here. And the woman in Revelation 17, and the woman which you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. And that's in reference to the woman sitting on the back of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns and standing amidst the waters, which we'll see that picture down the road when we get there. Sort of my flagship slide. All right, now we're coming back to Revelations 11:9. Walter, you're after my wife because you're the next person.
Revelation 11:9. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves.
Keep going.
Revelation 11:10. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these 2 prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth.
Okay, so here we state we're given another time period here, 3 days and a half, that their dead bodies lie in the street. And some people believe this is a literal time. And I don't know if I mentioned it last week. I read a book on a guy who believed he was one of the witnesses. And he had every intention of dying in the streets of Jerusalem, being killed, and in 3 days he was going to be raised. And also, again, I don't know how that's working for him now, but he wrote a whole book on it. It was well worth it. Somebody gave it to me free. I did not pay for the book. Somebody gave it to me. And I read it. But anyway, but here's, we're going to look at this 3 days and a half, probably next time, because it's going to take me a little bit to try to explain it. But here, this is what Joe was referring to earlier. They shall rejoice over them and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because of these 2 prophets that tormented them that dwelt on the earth. See, the church was feeling tormented by them because they were constantly a problem to them. Well, here's what Joe is mentioning. These are called the Huguenot Massacre Medal. It's amazing they got one in this good a shape. They're rejoicing over their victory. And I believe that second pope that you mentioned is the one on the heads.
Yeah.
Gregory.
Hold on a second.
I can't read from this coin.
Good.
Oh, Greg.
10, 11,
Greg,
12,
it might be.
It's
I see
Gregory
Greg.
the Eighth, I think.
Oh, here he is, Greg Gore.
It's Gregory the eighth.
Eight.
That's a 13 sitting
All
up
right.
there.
Well, that's him. There's this picture. Now you see over here on the other side, it might be a little confusing, but I'm going to show you here. It says, "And the nation shall sheathe their dead bodies 3.5 days, and shall not
13.
suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves." You look right here on the coin, you can see the dead bodies just lying in the street and people rejoicing around them.
You're right, it is Gregory the 13th and Philip the second of Spain.
Yeah.
Okay.
So together they equal 15.
Okay, but anyway, they carried this prophecy around in their pockets, so to speak. Or if it was a coin, or if it was just a medal that was put somewhere, it might be. I don't know what it means by a medal over a coin. Does anybody know if there's a difference in a medal and a coin?
A coin like this is commemorative, so it's not commercial. It doesn't have a monetary value. So it's not a coin that you would trade. It was a commemorative coin, like, the Franklin Mint put out commemorative coins all the time. And in the military, they do it constantly.
Okay.
It's to remember an event.
All right. But anyway, this is what they made, and as Joe's, what he read says that people were extremely appalled by putting the slaughter on one side of the coin and the pope on the other. It's just this amazing how far and bad things had gone, and what this beast rising up out of the sea, what it became.
But there's also a lot of falsity because you've got an angel with a cross, trampling over this man, when in fact it was a mob scene where they ordered the people, the common people, to kill the Huguenots.
I don't know how well y'all can see that. Can y'all see that pretty well?
They're in Egypt.
Yeah, you can see. Oh, okay. Never mind.
It's an angel running with a cross, and
Yeah, I see that.
and she's got the
You can see it.
cross in one hand and she's got a sword in another.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very visible.
A winged figure, yeah.
Yeah, it isn't Mercury
No, not.
or the FTD Florist.
Not necessarily an angel.
Anyway, so there's this history is being recorded. They gave this medal to other people's other leaders, it was something to hang on the wall if it was big. I don't know how big around this is. It might.
And they gave it to Catherine de Medici. And the Medicis of Italy, you've never seen such horrific violence as what they did to hold the Borgias, and the Medicis fought to keep their power. That's why you see so many towers in Italy, because that was their symbolism of great power, was they had a tower attached to their house. So the Medicis had huge money, huge influence, and they used violence. They were the original gangsters, the Italian gangsters, to get what you wanted. So it would be nothing for her to order this death.
All right. Okay. Rather than going 10 minutes past time, there's a little bit of explanation here. Not buried for 3.5 days. And I'll just leave this with you. This is actually thought to be a period of 105 years. You say, whoa, I need to get that out of that. But I'm going to stop there because I feel like I got to go into another whole section that I only have 5 minutes to talk about. But this has been an extremely interesting period of time for us to see that these two witness periods are extremely important in understanding what is going on through all these dark ages, and how hard those who even tried to be good Christians, how hard their life was. And keep in mind, the saints, the brethren, are all mixed kind of in with this. They're not the aggressors, they're not the ones trying to go to war, they're not the ones trying to side with the Huguenots. But they would at times perhaps have made a shield for them, spiritual shield for them in their lives by dwelling amongst them or however it worked, or meeting with them or whatever. I don't know of any history with the Huguenots. Does anybody know if we've ever had any history with the Huguenots?
The Christadelphians?
Yeah.
I don't think so. But I can look it up.
So whatever, but well, of course, Christadelphians weren't there at that time, but as far as the brethren of the day were somewhat shielded by these movements. It's just like we live in this country that defends it with tanks and planes and everything else, so that, you know, terrorists can't come in here like they're doing in Afghanistan. So we live in a certain amount of safety because we're on that side of the fence with them, but we're not 100% in their court. We just happen to be on the safer side, so to speak, for a while. So anyway.
I have a question. I'm sorry, I have an answer to the question at the beginning of the class about lithium. It's an appropriate time. Lithium-6 is the critical raw material needed for the production of single-stage thermonuclear and boosted fission weapons. This material is used in a fission-based nuclear weapon
Where does it come from? A rock?
Lithium.
That's what I'm
is a
saying.
metal.
It's coming.
Is it a metal?
It's a metal.
It's a metal.
And it's also, I think it can be used as a salt as well. It's on the periodical table.
Salt?
Yeah.
It's not what you think of in terms of salt.
I know,
It's a crystalline structure is what it can be turned into.
Anyway, North Korea needs it for their program, as do a lot of others. So it's used for that whole thing. It's a soft silver white metal. They're used as, when used as a target element in a reactor of a nuclear weapon, lithium-6 reacts with a neutron to produce trillium, which is T on the periodic table, the most important thermonuclear material for weapons. The trillium fuses with deuterium.
Yes.
It releases relatively large amounts of energy and neurons, becoming a key reaction driven by thermonuclear explosion and leading to the more efficient fissioning of the plutonium by weapon grade uranium in the weapon. I'll stop there, but that basically explains what its purpose is.
Why they would want it.
So with this power vacuum, they can get in and get their mining rights in as fast as possible with a new Taliban and get the lithium they need.
All right. Well, very good. Anybody else want to contribute anything?
We know that you won't be back together for 3 weeks.
Oh, yes. Walter is going on vacation, so my IT man is getting a vacation. That means I don't exist until, what, 3 weeks?
3 weeks from today.
3.
So September the what do we come back?
It's
2 classes? It's just 2 classes.
Yeah, it's just 2 classes, but yeah.
The next 2 classes, we're off, and you'll have to find out what 3.5 years days were.
Yeah, if you can remember.
3 weeks.
Well, Roger,
Yes.
you were asking about the history of the Huguenots, if there were any source that would be available, and I don't think you can do any better than Brother Thomas's account of that in Eureka. He gives a very informative account of the Huguenots and their history and how that they played this part that we're discussing tonight. So that would be a very good read for anyone that would be interested between now and the 2 weeks that we're not together.
That'll be your homework, Gerald.
Yeah.
So we're meeting back on the 16th
I think it's right.
of September. So we're skipping the next 2.
Okay. All right. Thank everybody for coming, and I hope it was educational. A lot of history there.
Thank
Very
you,
nice job.
Robert. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Liz, when you come back.
Have a good night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.
Class.
Stay safe.
Have a great night.
Good night.
Can I ask Walter a question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Are we still being recorded?
Yes.
I don't want this on record.
Oh, automatic records. I don't know if that can stop it. 'cause
I'll just call you, Martha.
Okay,
That's cool.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Showing secrets.